Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Today, Jennifer and I are joined by Candace Oglesby, who is the Program Director for Fluence Training's Ketamine-Assisted Psychotherapy Certificate Program and a licensed professional counselor in the state of Maryland. Candace began her career as a psychedelic-assisted therapist in 2020 when she sat on her first study as a clinical trial therapist, which studied the effects of psilocybin in cancer and TRD patients. Since then, she has gained trainings in ketamine, MDMA, and 5 MEO DMT assisted therapies. I don't know what any of those are except for ketamine and MDMA. So the rest of it, we're going to need some education. But anyway, in addition, Candace is the founder and owner of Jurnee Mental Health Consulting, LLC, a consulting business that provides support to individuals and businesses looking to deepen their understanding of mental health while also providing support and resources to global majority communities. Candace also serves as a DEI mental health consultant, trainer, speaker, and mentor within the psychedelic community. When Candace is not acting as psychotherapist, consultant, trainer, and mentor, she is spending time with her husband, family, and friends. Candace believes that cutting-edge therapies and techniques should be made available to everyone despite race, sexual orientation, gender, or socioeconomic status. Amen to all of that. Yes, clap to that. That is key. So Candace, thank you so much for being here. We are so excited to dive into all of this with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for just the invitation to be here to talk about something I'm so passionate about.
That leads right into the first question, which is tell us about you and how you became passionate about this topic.
Yes, I tell people all the time, I knew back in high school that I was going to be a psychotherapist. That was very clear to me. And as I age and become an older adult, I realized that there was a part of me who I believe she was seeking her own therapy, her own healing, her own recovery. And so a lot of us find ourselves in this space supporting folks because I think in some ways we're looking for our own healing as well. I've been practicing a psychotherapist for the past 12 years. I got my undergrad in psychology, went on to get a master's degree in clinical psychology, and then started working with those who were in the substance use population, then went on to climb the leadership ladder, I would say, within mental health, and then made a switch to go into private practice to get trained as a trauma-informed therapist. And then 3 years ago, I was introduced to psychedelic assisted therapy. I knew very little about psychedelics, had not had any personal experiences, actually came from the DARE generation.
Us too.
Yep. Same.
I was like, I'm not touching that. Like I had family members who battled with like substance use issues. And so when the invitation came to me that this would be something that might interest me, the only way that I think that I could have been compelled to change I would say now fast forward the entire trajectory of my career is being able to witness it firsthand and having the experience of sitting with participants on clinical trials and just seeing, I would say, the gifts of this medicine and how it really supported folks within their healing journey. I would say 3 years ago, completely turned my world upside down personally and professionally. And then having my own experience with ketamine, I am closing down private practice. December 27th is my last day working with my direct clients so that I can go into this work full time and really
Congratulations.
advocate. Thank you. And really advocate for this medicine for everyone. I think everybody should have access to this.
Wow. I'm really, really excited to dive into all this. And I literally don't know where to start because I have so many questions. So I'm going to make this a two-part question. I would really love to hear, if you don't mind sharing, about your experience with ketamine and maybe even tied to that, why you think ketamine therapy is so important and why it should be available to everybody.
Yeah, no, I think that that's a really important question. And thank you for asking me that. And I'm very transparent with my experiential experience that I had with ketamine. So about 2 years ago, I had an opportunity to get trained in ketamine assisted psychotherapy. And part of that training was that we have our own experiential experiences with
Cool.
ketamine. So I had an opportunity to do oral solution. And I also had an opportunity to do intramuscular injection. Ketamine can be used for different types of ways in terms of ingestion. And so I knew going in, the encouragement is to have your intentions. What do you want to experience throughout this and journey? And I will say, none of my intentions came up in that experience. But I will say what came up needed to come up. And I will say, I think the most important part of my healing experience was that at the time, my grandmother's dementia had gotten worse.
Mm.
And so what ketamine brought up was, you need to grieve. You have not been grieving the loss of your grandmother. Yes, she is still physically here with you, but the dynamics of your relationship have shifted with her, and you need to sit with this. And it was one of the most profound experiences that I think that I've had with grief, and grieving someone who was still physically present, because it also brought to my awareness there were all these other experiences that I had just not allowed myself to grieve. I really appreciated that because my grandmother is still alive. She doesn't call me by name. She recognizes my face. It really allowed me to kind of choose and determine my relationship with grief that I never had with any other grandparent before they had passed away. I say all of that to say that once I came back from this training, I was just like, all my clients will get ketamine. Just joking, not
Everybody.
all my clients.
Everybody line up.
Like everybody, you get ketamine, you get ketamine, you get ketamine. But no, so I mean, in all, seriousness, there were definitely clients that I was working with. We had been working together for quite some time. And, being a trauma therapist, working with historically marginalized folks, specifically women who were survivors of trauma, just noticing stuck points and just how traditional therapy was not working for them, even after years, 2-3 years of us working together. So I came back, and I was very transparent with some of my clients who really could benefit from this treatment. And I got together with the psychiatrist who was leading the group private practice at the time. And I said, I think this could be really helpful with our clients. But it just amazed me because I think that, Ray, a lot of people say that historically marginalized folks won't be open to this. And yes, there is a lot of stigma, but I get that people don't even know that this treatment exists. And so there's a whole lot of gatekeeping that happens in this space as well. And so when I share with my clients, I say, I'm getting trained in this modality. I'm not offering you anything that I have not experienced myself, but I think it could be really helpful. Here's some psychoeducation. Here's some research. Here's some YouTube videos. Let's have an open and transparent conversation about this. And let's see if this is something that you would even be interested in trying. Unbeknownst to me, it was a lot of my culturally diverse women who were like, sign me up. You don't have to convince me anymore.
Sign me up.
Yeah, same. Yep, women are leading the way. Absolutely.
And we did some very beautiful work. And I say that, right? These medicines are not a silver bullet. They're not a magic pill. They're not going to get anyone to a place of healing overnight. But it just feels like when we combine ketamine with therapy, the amount of time that, sometimes it takes for people to have breakthrough, we weren't battling against that. And the usual defense mechanisms that trauma survivors come in with, right? Because they're untrusting for various reasons. But those defenses were softened and they were able to do some very intense work within a short amount of time.
Is that what the ketamine actually does? Does it inhibit defense mechanisms or bring down our wall? Or how does it actually work?
There is, right, the mechanisms of action, which what ketamine has the ability to do. It has an ability to decrease our default mode network, which is responsible for our defenses. It has a nice way of just kind of softening that a bit so that, right, the mechanisms of change increases the window of neuroplasticity, which allows us to be able to make those changes that for whatever reason we haven't been able to make because of maybe the lack of resources or because of the lack of insight or the lack of clarity. I feel like I always say, like, it introduces us to parts of ourselves that maybe we've been isolating, pushing away because of fear, shame, and guilt. But ketamine has a nice way of softening that so that we can be introduced to those parts of ourselves and really do the healing work that's necessary to kind of push the needle forward.
You mentioned the gatekeeping around ketamine and the use of it. What, I kind of think I know the answer already, but whatever, I'll put this out there. What do you think is what do you think is behind that gatekeeping? Is it fear of the actual product, or is it racism, or is it a whole bunch of things? Like, what do you think is behind the gatekeeping around ketamine use?
Being a DEI consultant, always, I go right to what I feel like is white supremacy, right? Is at the top of this. Given that the psychedelic space is still very much a white, male, cisgendered, heterosexual space, power at the top, allowing certain access for a certain amount of folks who look a certain type of way. But I also think too, this is just my theory. This is not really based in fact, right? Or saying, but my observation is I think that if people from historically marginalized communities got a hold of this, right? Just imagine how much further along these communities would be. I think that this has a nice way of really supporting with kind of dismantling what we see around systemic oppression when it comes to mental health, because I feel like psychedelics is only a smaller microcosm, which I feel like is at the root of the macrocosm, right, of just the mental health system in general in our westernized civilization. Like, there's a broken system, and I think that we are so used to being reactive as just the health system in general. When we talk about proactive measures, I think that changes the game. And I think that you have a lot more people with having access, which changes and dismantles that systemic oppression. And it kind of switches that power, that playing field where certain people won't be able to maintain certain powers and privileges anymore.
When you have a client who's interested in doing the ketamine assisted therapy, are there things that they need to do in terms of prep work? Do they need to eat a certain diet? Do they need to, I don't know, cleanse, do an internal cleanse, or what? How do you prep for something like this?
Yeah, no, and I think that that's a really valuable question, because what we're saying is that people are already doing psychedelics, but there is preparation. If you're taking a journey, and I like to use the analogy, if you were taking a trip, most people just wouldn't get in the car and go, right? There's some planning that has to be done. And I will say that when we talk about these medicines, there's a responsibility that comes with these medicines. It's not you take the medicine and there's no responsibility that comes with this, because there are experiences, unfortunately, where people have been harmed because they haven't done preparation around taking the journey itself. But yeah, so typically when I was leading and developing a ketamine program and really supporting my clients, we would at least do 4 sessions where we would just prep for the experience. And, that includes having like a medical eval to determine someone appropriateness, because there are limitations. There are counterindications to this medicine. And so we have to evaluate just to make sure that, one, people are physically stable, but also that they're mentally, emotionally, and spiritually stable to do this level of intensity of work. And so some of the things that we talk about is, what does your community support look like? I find that especially if people are doing, right, this type of intense therapy, sometimes that could shift dynamics. And the people around you who are used to manipulating you, taking advantage of you, there might be some insights and some clarity, like, well, hold on now, I didn't have this experience and I want to advocate for myself, right? I'm feeling more worthy now. Some of that shame, some of that guilt has been softened a bit. People are operating from a different level of clarity and insight. I mean, even talking about how to engage with the medicine as well. Because I think sometimes there's this misconception that, oh, you're going to take ketamine or you're going to take this psychedelic and you don't have to do any work. It's almost like if they're taking some sort of psychotropic medication, no, like you have to be able to engage with the medicine. And what that looks like is that, we invite people to be an active participant of their experience, to be able to get curious, to get exploratory. Sometimes the journey gets a little rough. And when we say rough, that sometimes it can bring challenges, experiences up, because this is not about like doing what we've always done and push things down. But what the ketamine has the ability to do is bring certain things to the surface. And we want our clients to go towards what might have been an escape or pushing down, but to really be able to confront whatever is coming up in the experience head on. And there's ways to be able to do that without re-traumatizing someone or really causing or dismantling someone in that process. And so we talk about that. There's music as well. We identify music as the silent therapist in the room. And usually that is music that it does not contain words or has words that may not be understandable to the client without culturally appropriating, because that's important too. That happens in this space because these medicines come from indigenous wisdom that has been around a lot more than we have been alive in terms of human beings. So yeah, there are quite a few things that we talk about in preparation to really support the client and how to be able to take care of themselves too. So it's not just the prep, but it's also the integration. And the integration also happens after the journey, where we invite clients to be able to take what insight and clarity has come from the experience so that they can interweave it back into their daily functioning, so that they have a way to take back what they've captured and be able to integrate it into their daily life.
During the actual experience where the patient is getting the infusion or the pill or however it's being administered, what happens at that point? Are you as the therapist asking them questions? Are you asking them to tell you what they're experiencing? Like, are they seeing like visions of a sort? Like, I'm trying to gauge what that experience is actually like to be actually in it.
Yeah, no, I think that, right, that's always a question that people ask, like, well, what is actually happening in the journey itself? And I will say that everybody's experience is different, right? Because it depends on the type of intentions that you set, but also holding those intentions loosely, right? Because as I mentioned, I set those intentions and none of them came up in the experience, but what needed to. But really, that is an opportunity for the client to do their work, to do their internal work where they are exploring those intentions. So as a therapist, I am really just holding space and really inviting the client to do that introspective work that really requires them to get curious and exploratory. And so sometimes I'll invite clients to have on eye shades to really kind of internalize that experience. I'll offer them headphones again, so that they're able to kind of have that internalized experience. And part of that preparation is that we teach people, right? So we know that people can get curious by doing mindfulness, breathing techniques, meditation, grounding, resourcing. And so they're also using that if they need to do that as well. I really appreciate ketamine because I find in traditional therapy, oftentimes I feel like I'm doing more work than the client. And so my experience has been a lot of times in ketamine or even being on psychedelic journeys within clinical research trials is that gives me an opportunity to kind of step out of the way and really allow the client to do the work that is already in them to do, right? We're just fostering a safe environment, being there as a support in case anything challenging comes up, but it's really an opportunity for them to get curious. And so I'll give you an example. I had a client who was on a trial, and one of their intentions was that they wanted to make closure with a deceased uncle. And I remember it was halfway kind of towards the end of their psilocybin experience. And this client was finally met by the uncle, and the uncle just relayed the message: you don't have to worry about me anymore.
Wow.
I am taken care of. I appreciate you loving on me while I was here. That was that exchange that client, that participant needed to have. And that did not come from my system at all. It was just me kind of being there, making sure that they remain safe. But that was the work that client was able to do. And sometimes, right, people can have what we know as changes in sensory, where there can be visual hallucinations and things like that. But I invite clients to not get caught up on the hype of psychedelics, because I know that, psychedelics is coming back around. And sometimes people are like, well, I'm going to see things, or they're going to be shapes, or they're going to be colors. And it's like, that could be, but it may not be. And again, everybody's experience is relative to themselves. So I tell folks, we talk about the difference between expectations versus intention setting. And we don't want people to set expectations, even though we know that, right, people are going to go off what they see and hear. But expectations sometimes can lead to a binary outcome where we really want it to be an unfolding or whatever the system needs to bring forward. And when I say system, meaning one's body.
Can somebody go into the experience without setting any intentions, or can the intention just be to just experience whatever comes up, or is that too broad?
Well, so I always say this: the medicine needs a place to land, right? And so having those intentions, I think, gives the medicine some place to land. But I also seen people say the intention is, I want to be open, right? Because maybe I'm used to wanting to control things, or maybe I'm used to being too rigid, right? And I want things to go my way. And so I want, the medicine to help me to get curious about where this comes from, right? So I have seen that too. And then, like I said, just because you set intentions, right, doesn't mean that is what's going to happen. And we invite people to be open to whatever may need to unfold or grab, I'll say, their curiosity. You don't necessarily have to have it, but I always say, I think it's always helpful just to kind of give the medicine some place to land. Yeah.
So this is a two-part question, kind of. I have done holotropic breath work. This sounds somewhat similar. Is it like holotropic breath work in that if you're feeling something, we want to amplify that feeling in order to, and is there something you do as a therapist to help like say I'm in there and I'm feeling anger. I have this, because this happened with me in holotropic breath work. Is it your job then as a therapist to help me amplify the anger, or is it your job more to sit back and watch me do that myself? And then I had a second part, which has escaped me. So just do that part.
That's okay. Yeah. No, I really appreciate that question, Jennifer, because holotropic breath work is actually, it can induce altered states of consciousness. And that's what a psychedelic is, right? A psychedelic helps us to achieve an altered state or non-ordinary state of consciousness. One of the things I noticed about some trainings is that, right, they do ask that folks have experiential, and holotropic breath work is one of them that can meet that criteria. But I would say, in terms of answering your question around the anger, I don't know necessarily if, so I would say my job is definitely not to amplify the anger, but my job is to help support the client maybe get curious about that anger, right? So why is my anger coming up in this moment? What maybe does my anger want to share with me? Maybe how does it need my attention? So really it's just, how do we get exploratory? How do we get curious about what is being amplified by, say, the tool by way of holotropic breath work or ketamine or psychedelics?
Okay, so that reminded me of my second question. When you are the therapist in these ketamine assisted therapy sessions, are you a sitter in it, or are you more doing therapy before and after the event?
Yeah, so before, right, using some of my therapeutic techniques to help prepare. Sometimes, right, if the experience gets challenging, I might need to leverage some of those therapeutic skills just to kind of help support clients to be able to get back in that experience again without kind of coming out of their window of tolerance. And then the therapy is part of the integration work as well. And I will say that, right, what I think we usually define as therapy skills is in traditional therapy where we're doing a whole lot of doing. It's just different in ketamine. So I'm using my therapy skills, but I'm doing a whole lot of being versus, say, doing a whole lot of doing during that time.
So you're counting on your client's body and maybe, what are the right words for this? Their internal knowing to bring forth what it is that they need.
Exactly.
And you're really providing the space and safety and container maybe for that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I would totally want to jump in on this.
Yeah.
I am very excited about the possibility of someday doing that type of journey. I think it could be really powerful.
Yeah.
I just want to go way back a little bit. For people who don't know, what exactly is ketamine? Is it created in a lab? Is it natural? Is it indigenous? Like,
it's a good question.
What is it?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So ketamine is actually an anesthetic. It's one of the safest anesthetics that, widely is used for, we see in pediatrics. It's developed in the 1960s and didn't become FDA approved until the 70s. And we actually saw this through vets within the Vietnam War who were getting hurt. And so, of course, as the evolution of the medical system comes about, they started using this in emergency rooms to help folks who were suicidal. And we started to see the rapid decrease in people's suicidal symptoms. And therefore, we started using ketamine by way to help treat people with depression, anxiety, and with suicidal ideation. And then as newer research becomes available, we're seeing this support people with PTSD symptoms and also with alcohol use disorder as well.
So interesting. So if someone were coming in for that type of any of those symptoms, especially the suicidal and alcoholism, do they have one journey with ketamine? Do they have several journeys? Like, what does the process look like before we're seeing results in maybe suicidal ideation or alcoholism?
That is relative, Ray, to the client to determine how many treatment episodes. And I think it depends on the protocol that practitioner is using. So I'll just give an example that, the protocol that I use with my clients is that we would possibly do 6 to 8 ketamine sessions that would include preparation plus integration. And then within 24 to 72 hours of the journey, they would have the integration process because of the neuroplasticity window. And so once they did 6 to 8 weeks, we would take about maybe a 4 to 6 week hiatus just to allow the medicine to kind of land however it needs to land. And then at that point in time, you and your client can decide whether you're going to do booster sessions, how often those booster sessions are going to be. There's also group CAP protocols as well. I've never had the privilege of being able to facilitate group CAP, but part of my experiential was that I was in a group CAP experience with my colleagues, which I think, right, how this medicine is going to be more accessible is in a group protocol aspect because you get more people not having to pay as much money. And you can work with more folks during a duration of time than if you were to do this on an individual level where someone would have to pay for your time as a practitioner versus if you're in a group experience, it cuts down on costs.
All the holotropic breathwork sessions I've been involved with have been groups like that between 6 and 18 people breathing together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's something to be said about collective healing as well that we don't talk enough about in this space. And I think when we talk about historically marginalized populations, a lot of our survival is based on the collective and how we have collectively been able to navigate racial trauma and all sorts of types of PTSD.
I am blown away by this. I actually know somebody who is pursuing ketamine therapy because of treatment-resistant depression. I don't think this person's experience has happened yet, but I'm very curious to see how it goes for them.
Yeah.
And I know that they are very hopeful that it will be able to help? Just generally, I'm thinking, oh, well, you'll journal about it or whatever, or you'll talk to, but what would that experience look like of, you've done the ketamine journey and now it's time to integrate what has happened?
I will say that integration doesn't just happen in one setting, right? I
Okay.
let my clients know and have let them know that integration can happen over days, weeks, months, even years of having, right, these experiences. I feel like, yeah, I had my ketamine group experience, right, 2 years ago, but there's still elements of that I am still integrating even to this day. And
Okay.
so I think therapy is one form of integration. It's not the only type of integrations. As mentioned, there's group integration. There are actually group integration groups out there that exist. As you were mentioning, journaling, music, movement as well. We do know, right, by way of trauma is not stored in the frontal parts, right, of our brain, but it's stored in our body. And so if we have somatic integration tools, that helps our body to also metabolize that trauma as well. There's Reiki. I usually just tell folks, what is it that brings you joy? That is how we can leverage integration, whether it's spending time out in nature, whether it's hooking up with your favorite person that you love to talk to, someone that you feel loved and cared for. Again, whatever brings you joy and how we can leverage that in helping you to make sense of this experience.
Okay. Can everybody benefit from ketamine therapy, or is it just people who have significant trauma in their background or in their current life?
Yeah, so there are limitations with the research, right? And there are counterindicators to this medicine. So typically, we have not seen this be helpful with folks who have, I would say, personality disorders. Of course, pregnant women, nursing moms. We do not encourage anyone who has untreated blood pressure or cardiovascular issues. And I think there are also limitations. So if you have significant trauma, what we call as complex trauma, I think this medicine can work, but I've always encouraged folks to at least have 3 months of just regular form of trauma therapy, because this is intense work. And so if you have someone who's highly dysregulated, they have no skills coming in, they've never been to therapy, and they're meeting criteria for complex PTSD, this would not be a sort of treatment that I would encourage someone out the gate to do unless they have some form of a foundation that they've been working through already and have that support to be able to help them. And also, I'm trying to think if there's any other, someone who has like untreated migraine issues, that can also be a counterindication for this medicine as well. And someone with untreated bipolar disorder as well,
Okay.
we have seen this be a counterindicator.
If someone is currently in a traumatic experience, like say if they're in an abusive relationship, or I don't know, any other number of things that can be traumatic, do they have to wait until they're out of that situation before they can start ketamine therapy?
So I always say it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Right.
If someone's basic
Yeah.
needs are not taken care of,
Yeah.
there is no way that they're going to be in a position to do any sort of insightful work. So
Right.
if
Good
someone
point.
is in an emergent situation, right, where they're being abused, that is a basic life need. We need to get you
Okay.
to a point where you have stable and safe housing.
Got
Once
it.
we're able to work with you through that, get you some skills, we get you some safety, then ketamine might be an option. But I would say someone whose basic life needs are not being met, probably not the time to do this type of work, especially if there's not a certain level of safety and stability already kind of in place.
Very
That's
good
a
point.
beautiful answer. Beautiful.
Yeah.
I am curious, how do you think ketamine assisted therapy ties with feminism?
Mm. Oh man, I feel like that's such a nuanced question. But when I think about feminism, and I think about just the advocacy of women's rights. I think when we talk about women empowerment, and even when we talk about just liberation in general, because
Liberation.
that's what I tie feminism to, is this
Yeah.
liberation, that
Absolutely.
I think ketamine is a tool that can really support folks with collective and individual liberation, right? Especially when we talk about dismantling systemic oppression, when we talk about dismantling patriarchy, right?
Yep.
When we talk about dismantling phobias. I think we have a tool here that really can heal and leverage, we can leverage to really support people in that type of healing. Especially when I think about breaking down the barriers of systemic oppression. I'm working on a study with a colleague right now where we are trying to investigate, like, what are the barriers, what are the opportunities for Black and Brown therapists to be able to break through in this space. And, you know, just what we're seeing is the whitewashing of these medicines. What we're seeing is the gatekeeping and the power and the privilege. And when we talk about the extracting of indigenous wisdom from these medicines, to me, that is feminism, right? We cannot have this medicine without talking about liberation. Because the backs of the people, right, that wet blood and tears that people have, so I would say selfishly given to this space for it to be where it is, we wouldn't have these gifts, we wouldn't have these medicines if it wasn't for these people. And who I'm talking about is people like Marina Sabina, you know, who died because of this, whose knowledge was extracted without her consent. I just want to say that when I think about feminism, when I think about these medicines, I think about Black and Brown Indigenous communities who are still fighting for this, but also this idea that I don't think that we can talk about healing without talk about collective liberation.
Pardon my ignorance. I don't know who Marina Sabina is, and I feel a little.
I'm right there with you.
Shameful about that,
I'm with
but
you.
I feel like I should. Okay.
I'm right there with you.
You know,
teach us. I'm right there with you.
Yeah. So can you tell us who Marina Sabina is and
Yeah.
why her story is important?
Her legacy. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. So Marina Sabina, Maria Sabina, excuse me, is an Indigenous woman who, you know, is no longer with us, but colonizers basically extracted her knowledge and her wisdom that she had around plant-based medicines. They came back to America, right? And they started to get fame and notoriety around this. But unfortunately, Maria Sabina got ostracized from her community, got blamed because of allowing this medicine to be released in this way. And she put no monetary value on it. She said, you know, this has been passed down to me. I want to share this with you, but make sure you give reciprocity where reciprocity is due. Unfortunately, you know, she died not having been given the recognition because of her contributions to these medicines.
We have to read about her.
Yeah. Well, Candace, thank you for speaking her name in this conversation and for bringing her to our awareness so that we can now educate ourselves on the rest of her story, and so that people listening today can know about her as well. So thank you for bringing her into the conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you.
I have one more question, and it pertains to what you brought up in the beginning about being part of the DARE generation. We are also part of the DARE generation, and I always learned, oh, don't do those drugs because if you do it once, you might go insane, right? I never touched anything because I didn't want to go insane. How has that legacy, I think it's also tied into this question of diversity, because I think that, I don't know exactly, I'm uneducated in this, but I have some feelings around that the general population we were taught that these drugs were dangerous. We should stay away from them. If we were to, they were criminalized. If we were caught using them, we'd have some harsh consequences. And then on the other side, people with lots of money, maybe rich white families, were able to have access to these drugs. Probably even in the DARE generation. How does that all come into play?
Well, I mean, of course, when I think about DARE, right, we're talking about Nixon and Reagan administration.
Oh yeah, I forgot about those guys.
The war on drugs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So do we see the conspiracy here now?
Yeah. Just say no.
I forgot about those guys. Yeah.
And so we know the war on drugs, right? That was for a select few. That was not for the predominant population. And when we look at the war on drugs, that's also connected to mass incarceration, right?
Yeah.
And again, you know, that is for a select few. That's not for the dominant culture. And so now that these medicines are up for possible rescheduling, that gives certain people access. But I will say that there are still certain consequences for a select few. Right.
Yes, that's very scary.
Yeah, for
Absolutely.
sure.
Absolutely.
And so when we talk about that preparation, this is why we need culturally informed, sensitive practitioners, healers, bringing acknowledgement that there is still history, there is still intergenerational trauma attached to these medicines. And we cannot offer these to everybody, right? Because how they take up space, how this medicine takes up space in certain people's bodies is going to look different than the dominant. And so we need to acknowledge that when we're doing preparation with folks, that stigma, that intergenerational trauma, when we talk about the war on drugs, when we talk about mass incarceration, because all of that is connected to how clients are going to be able to prepare for these experiences, again, in a safe, contained, and ethical way. Because I guarantee you that I would say my BIPOC clients, how I handle preparation has looked a little different than how I have navigated that with my white clients who were doing ketamine or any other sort of psychedelics. And I think it would be irresponsible if practitioners don't acknowledge that in that preparation process. Also, when we talk about these policies and procedures, when we talk about FDA approval, all of these things need to be discussed because they have an impact, especially when we talk about if we're trying to make these medicines accessible to all.
Yeah, it's so complicated and it's so deep. And even in my own history, in my own family with drug abuse and alcoholism, my brother and sister both died of alcohol and drug related. So I've been sort of anti everything. I would really love to benefit from this medicine. I don't want to do drugs. And I see, even when I say that, how that has been programmed into me. Like, that is not actually a cool statement. And I can hear it coming out of my mouth, but I know it's in my brain.
Yeah. And if I were working with you as a practitioner, let's talk about that. Let's talk about what does it look like for you to have this part of yourself that wants to receive healing, right? That wants to be able to maybe get curious about a certain part maybe that has kept you stuck. But let's also acknowledge the part of you that's dealing with the intergenerational trauma of having two loved ones die due to substance use. Because that's part of your recovery, that's part of your healing. And I think that before we can go any further, we would just have to acknowledge that and hold space for that. And maybe ask those parts of yourselves, what do they need from you to trust that you could do this and maybe not end up kind of like how family members have ended up? How do we do this in a responsible way?
Oh my gosh, you are so good. You bring me to tears.
But that's part of your preparation.
Yeah, you bring me to tears just hearing those words. That acknowledgement is so huge.
And to normalize the fear, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, you are so good.
Wow. Oh, God, Candace.
Beautiful.
I mean, so kind of touching on that and the intergenerational trauma and stigma around therapy and working with communities of color, there's still some stigma around therapy.
Yeah.
Or, telling people your business, or just showing what's perceived as weakness, or
Yeah.
asking for help. Is that getting better? And can ketamine therapy and maybe other psychedelic assisted therapies help with that?
I always say, like, I don't even think we can have a conversation about this unless we start off the gate with education,
Mm,
right? Because
mm-hmm.
people don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that we have to honor, like, when we look at our country, when we look at medical US trials, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which
Mm-hmm.
psychedelics has its, at least in the westernized society, that's where we're getting our statistics from. We cannot talk about medical apartheid. We cannot not
Yeah.
talk about that. We have to honor
Yeah.
that. We have to honor, I get why there's a part of you that doesn't want to be here, because our system has shown you time and time again that it is not trustworthy. And even as a person who looks like you, I am still part of that system. There
Yeah.
is still an advantage that I operate with, and a certain type of power and privilege that even as a Black woman that I operate with. So I think we have to normalize those fears coming out the gate. And I wouldn't assume that someone automatically trusts me, even if on the surface I look like them. But that comes with rapport building. You got to get to know me. And I have to be patient for that process. And I also have to educate you too, because I get that you probably don't know nothing about this. And so there's that time and space that's needed to educate folks and build rapport with folks. And I think that's one of the criticisms that I sometimes have about this, especially being on clinical trials where they say self-disclosure is not important. But one of the things I know about people who look like me, I'm not doing nothing that you ain't never tried before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Absolutely.
you are not going to invite me into a space and you have not benefited from what you're trying to get me to do.
Yep.
That certain level of self-disclosure is important. And of course, I don't need to go into detail about my experience, but even in traditional therapy, I tell my clients, I am not offering you a modality that I have not benefited from. So if I'm offering someone internal family systems, I can say right here that I've been a client of someone for 3 to 4 years doing my own work with internal family systems. If I'm offering someone EMDR, I'm not offering you something that I have not benefited from, because that is just kind of how I show up to this space as a therapist. Like, I can't offer someone or support someone with the gift of therapy and I have not benefited from myself. To me, that just feels inauthentic. And I totally get that for some people, just physically or for whatever medical reasons, they cannot have ketamine, they cannot have psychedelics, right? I'm not speaking to those people. But to the people that I am speaking to that get into this space and they don't have experiences, you can't talk from a personal perspective of how this has helped you. I have to question, why are you in this space? Why are you doing this work? And I don't want to hear the argument, well, I don't have to have cancer to be able to treat someone. This is a totally different, this is comparing apples to oranges.
Yeah. And I think what you're bringing up makes me think too about you've mentioned having trauma informed therapists and that sort of thing. I think it's also important to have therapists who share some common ground with you. You do work with Black Therapists Rock, and I think that is huge. Just anecdotally, I don't know a whole lot of Black therapists. I know a few, but I myself have never gone to a Black therapist. All of my therapists have been white, and I've been to quite a few.
Good for you, Raquel.
Yeah. I am doing the work, trust me. But I just think it's so important, not just the work that you're doing, just you, Candace Oglesby, on your own, but the fact that you do this work in community with Black therapists rock, that you do this work in conjunction with other communities of color, that you're keeping all of this in mind as you're doing the work that you're doing. So I just want to put that out there and give you kudos for that, because that's incredibly important. It's important for people to have therapists who know what their situations, bring to the table. So I just want to thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for saying that. Even statistically, just thinking mental health in general, Black and brown therapists only make up 4% of the therapist population.
4%?
4%.
It's far lower than I even thought.
When I talk about this work, I have to be passionate about it, because when I'm talking and I'm doing consultation with Black and brown therapists who are trying to break into this space, like, I'm very honest. I'm like, it is hard to exist here when you're constantly having doors shut in your face, when you're constantly told prioritizing BIPOC initiatives are too expensive, or that's not a priority of ours right now. But we want you in the space as a therapist. But how do you think that lands on me?
Yep.
When these
Not
are
good.
my communities?
Yeah, not good.
I live on the west side of Baltimore. And if anyone knows about the west side of Baltimore, you know what my neighborhood looks like. Please do not be fooled with my degrees and how I show up physically as a lighter skinned Black woman.
Yeah.
I still serve a community who some people will never have access to this medicine. Yeah. And that is a reality that I have to sit with every single day when I consciously choose to show up in a space where I know I am not valued and wanted most of the time.
Well, we value you,
Thank
Candace.
you.
We do. We value you and the work that you're doing. I hate to say this in 2023, almost 2024, but you're blazing a trail. In this late stage in history, we still can say that somebody is blazing a trail where there should just be
a trail, a road, a highway,
a freaking fucking highway. You're bringing services to people who generally aren't going to get it necessarily, either because of just general access or not having somebody that they trust, because they don't think that somebody who looks differently is going to be able to understand their situation. Thank you. As somebody who's, like I said, I've been in therapy for decades, and I've been incredibly fortunate that I've had therapists that I've been very, very comfortable with, who have been informed and evolved to a certain degree. And so I'm one of the lucky ones. But for other people, we need you and more people like you getting into the field. So thank you for the outreach that you do and for this work, because Jennifer and I say it all the time, everybody benefits from therapy, and everybody needs to do it, whether they think they do or not. They need to do it. Now it's my turn to be brought to tears. So thank you for that work.
Was there anything that we didn't ask you about that you wanted to say today?
Yeah, I want to reiterate how important it is that if people are going to do these medicines, I think in any context, just to do research, because there are bad actors in this space like there are in any space, right?
Yeah.
And capitalism, right?
Yep.
Can overshadow what this work was created to do, and that is to create beautiful healing for everybody. Everybody has a birthright, I'll say, to this medicine. And so if you're thinking about doing this, or you're considering and you're not sure, please do your research.
Yeah.
Please ask questions. You have a right to advocate for yourself. You have a right to safety when doing these medicines. You have a right to someone seeing you and acknowledging your unique difference that you bring. But I just want to say there's a responsibility, and I don't take that responsibility lightly. And so I'm inviting folks, just to honor what feels like an attuned place to be if this is something that you're considering doing this, just to do your research and stay safe.
Mm.
Yeah.
And if people want to get a hold of you, how can they do that?
Yeah, so they can reach me, www.jurnee, but not spelled your traditional way. I have such reverence for Jurnee Smollett. If you know her,
Yes.
she's Rachel on Full House. But my first example of representation on TV, and I just honor her and I admire her as an actress. So, but it's spelled Jurnee with Candace.com. So www.jurneewithcandace.com.
And we'll put
Oh, it's
that in the
perfect.
show notes. So
Thank you.
It
Thank you
has
so
truly,
much. Yeah,
truly,
thank you.
truly been an honor to speak to you today.
absolutely.
I'm very
Thank you
moved.
for having me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
doing the work that you're doing, Candace, and keep doing it.
Thank
Keep
you for
doing it.
making the space. Because like I said, these spaces are not always offered. So thank you for the courage for inviting me on to talk about this, something I'm so passionate about. So thank you.
It's our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Wow. Wow. That
Yeah.
is one of my, I mean, I love all of our episodes,
Mhm.
but this is one of my favorite all time. I think this work is so important. Candace was talking about how capitalism can overtake the
Mhm.
system. I
Mhm.
actually think that these non-ordinary states of consciousness combined with therapy and practitioners like Candace would change the world so that capitalism doesn't have the big capital C. That I just feel like it's,
Mhm.
I think it's one of the main avenues for healing of the, and I haven't even done it yet, but
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's, notice the yet,
Yeah. Yeah.
big yet.
But you have done the holotropic breath work, which is
Yes.
key. We've talked before about how oppressive systems keep us focused on the wrong shit. It keeps us focused on like being held down and living in a shitty place or having a shitty job. And so we don't focus on let me heal. We
Mhm.
have so many other and important distractions. Don't get me wrong, those are all valid and important and key to living a safe and healthy life. But if you're so focused on all of those things that you can't focus on your own healing or even to the realization that you need healing, then there's still going to be that power over.
One of the things that I think is so exciting about the world of holotropic breath work, psychedelics, ketamine assisted therapy is that, and I really, really believe this, Raquel, and you're the one that started talking about it, is that drop and the ripple effect.
Mm-hmm.
So I get a little healing. There's a little ripple that goes out in my community, in my home with my kids, and then out into my community and maybe my workspaces. You get a little healing, there's that drop that ripples out. I think everyone's going to say, oh, Jennifer's being woo woo, but I think this little bit of training, healing that we get changes the vibrational level that we live in. And I don't believe that we anymore. And I used to think we have to do this. I used to think we had to get out there and get our picket signs and our, what do they call those things that you shout through?
Bullhorn, megaphone.
Yeah, get our bullhorn and scream and picket and stomp. And I used to do that. I used to be out there all the time with all sorts of causes. And it felt like, what's happening? Did it change anything? Did it do anything? And I'm sure that it did.
Yeah.
But now I'm starting to see that when we heal ourselves, a little bit of healing and the ripple effect, it actually changes the vibration around us. It changes the vibration of the world. I think that's how we topple capitalism. I don't think we can do it with a bullhorn.
I think we need both. I think we need both. I think it's a holistic approach. It's a holistic approach to things. We are taught growing up in school, we're like, oh, there's this way to do it, and that's the only way. No,
You're so smart.
There's so many. Thank you.
You are so smart.
There's so many ways to do all of this work. You don't have to pick just one.
And we need all of it Because you're
need
right.
all of
Because
it.
if we don't pick up the bullhorn, silence is also violence.
Exactly.
And being silent and not saying something when
Yeah.
something is
Yeah.
basically awful, horrible,
Yeah.
things that are
Yeah.
going, we do have to say something. You're right. But again,
And for people who aren't comfortable saying anything, they can heal themselves and be an example to other people. Do you know what I mean? Like there's ways that this can all
I guess
work
I'm just
together.
being the eternal optimist that if we heal ourselves and it ripples out, these systems of oppression will topple and there won't be the need for the bullhorn.
Yeah. I think
know.
there's
I know it's
I
my
think
Pollyanna nature.
but I think it's lovely. I think that's one of the things that I really love about you, Jennifer, is that you have this hope for what can be done. Like we've said in other episodes, there are multiple ways that you can be part of the good, right? There are multiple ways that you can show your support for a cause. There's multiple ways that you can find your healing. We heal our world through performing certain like group big actions, and then we also heal our world from healing ourselves. If these different modalities, and in this case ketamine and other psychedelics, if those can be made available to more people, and specifically in this situation BIPOC communities, underserved communities, think of the healing that can happen in those communities that can then ripple out and heal so many other communities and people and situations.
Yeah.
But we have to make sure that these modalities are available to people. And thank God for Candace for being so passionate about this and doing the work to help make this available to more people.
Oh, yeah. I learned so much from her today.
Same.
I am so grateful for her approach.
Yeah. And other therapists, if there's any therapists listening to this, take a note, man, from the way that Candace is doing this. Reach out to her, learn, get involved in this, or become trauma informed in another way. But take the holistic approach. You're not just sitting in a chair across from somebody or seeing somebody on a computer screen and going, so tell me about your day, tell me about your mother, or whatever the hell. I mean, there's so much more to it.
When you talk about that approach, I see exactly why psychedelics would be necessary, because who's going to drop their guard to that?
Exactly.
Like, how are you going to even feel? I mean, it's hard to even go out into the world and drop our mask, right? But how are you going to do that with that power dynamic without? I can see why that takes years. Anyway, this is beautiful work. I'm so happy we had her on the show, and I can't wait for people to hear about it.
Oh, so excited.
She's changing the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I'm so excited about people hearing this episode and exploring everything else that Candace does, and yeah, just people supporting what she's doing. I love it.
Me too. Bye, Raquel.
Bye, Jennifer. Thanks everyone for listening today. We will be back with more Madness Cafe next week. You can find us on Instagram at Madness Cafe Podcast or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com. Bye.